You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking to Jim Carl, Senior Director of Film at the Carolina Theater of Durham. Jim is in charge of retro programming, and on this episode, we talk about what retro programming is. How do you book a movie to show in a theater? How do you contact a studio? How do you market a movie? What's the secret formula? What's the recipe in programming movies for an independent theater and doing it really well for a very long time? Jim talks about all of that and so much more. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look behind me, you'll see these shelves that are here on the corner. I used to have an entire spare bedroom that had the entire 3 to 4 walls of the room were covered in just those shelves. And I had about 1,500 VHS tapes that I finally had to pare it down. And I have what's here, and I have a couple here up on the shelf. Not a lot. A couple up on the top row. I see Superman 2. I see Maxie with Glenn Close, stuff like that.
I'm assuming that your collection, Jim, grew organically. Movies that you sought out, movies in the discount sale, we got to get rid of bins at your respective mom and pop video store?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the mid 80s. That's when I was in high school, and I went to college. And that's about the same time that video stores, I mean, in the early 80s, VHS were still full price. You know, they were still $100, $80. It was rare. And it wasn't really until about the mid 80s, we're talking like 86, 87, that VHS started getting sold at the video stores used. Extra copies were being sold off. And that's when you could start buying them, even then, for like $20, $30. I mean, it didn't really start getting down to like the $4.99s. That didn't happen until a long time later.
The things we put up with at the movies. But National Video, with more stores than anyone, gives you more of the latest movies than anyone at low prices in the comfort of your own home. And the popcorn's on us instead of on you. So bring the stars home tonight with National Video, because the best seat in the house is at your house.
I was in college, and I used to go to the video stores all around the state and buy VHS tapes. And then I was back at the dorm. All of my friends would come and borrow VHS from me and use me as the video library for the dorm. I had hundreds of VHS tapes at that point, but I kept them back home at my parents' house. And I only brought with me the ones that I figured people would want to watch. But I was always buying stuff nonstop.
Did you charge your friends a membership? I remember like the early days of mom and pop stores, you had to get a VHS membership.
I really should have, because I lost a lot of those tapes. No, but I would make them check them out because I couldn't keep track of who had what. So I had little index cards where I would write down the name of the film and who checked it out on what day, and I keep them in a little box, so that I would at least know a couple of weeks later when I'm looking for something who had it last.
Have you always been a physical media person, either growing up with books or comics to VHS to now Blu-rays or what have you?
Well, I've phased out of it now that I'm older because it's just too much to keep up with. But when I was younger, yeah, I used to collect VHS. I used to collect movie posters. I used to collect programs and TV guides and magazines and things like that. And I still have a lot of that. But as time's gone on, I stopped collecting movie posters. Now I only buy 1 or 2 a year for the ones that I was missing that I never had in the first place that I'd like to have. And I've stopped buying physical media for the most part. Every now and then, if something comes along, like a King Kong 1976 steelbook with the original TV theatrical cut on it, I'll buy that. But it's rare. It's rare that I'll buy anything physical media. Nowadays, I basically, even though I have something on Blu-ray, and if I see it on discount for $4.99 on some streaming service, I'll buy it.
You've never really been a big physical media person, at least in the time that, we've kind of gotten to know each other, right?
Yeah, that's what Jim and I were talking about that before you jumped on a little bit about that. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of having it, but for me, it's random. Like Jim, you mentioned King Kong 76. Like I have randomly one of the King Kong like drinking glasses that you got from Burger King back in '76. I've got that.
King Kong on King Kong glasses. Get one free at Burger Chef when you buy a Big Chef or Super Chef large fries and a large serving of Coca-Cola. Or get one with purchase of a regular size Coke at a special price. King Kong glasses. Get all 4 for your kids. You want a straw?
You get more tonight at Burger Chef.
But I don't have to seek out the latest release and like the 5-disc set or anything like that. Like I get my joy comes out of going to the theater and like experiencing these things on the big screen with an audience. Like right now and not just right now, but ever since I was a kid, I've talked about many times on the show, in my pajamas running through the parking lot to see Star Wars for the first time at the drive-in, trying to get my parents back into the station wagon as the lights were flickering. That's what started it for me, and that continues to this day. Is really just being in the theater for that experience. That's my love.
And you know what's funny is that today I'm having a struggle. I'm struggling real hard to not cave into the temptation now that everything is 4K to buy a 4K TV. I mean, I was a 4K TV. I struggled even let's say 10 years ago when they came out with those 3D TVs and you could watch Jaws 3D and Friday the 13th in 3D. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I kind of want that. And I did. And that's the same thing now with the 4K. It's like I see these thumbnails on YouTube where they're reviewing the new 4K of Exorcist 2, The Heretic. And I'm like, ooh, I really want that. I want it.
Maybe not Exorcist 2, Jim. There is a bridge too far.
It might be a better film to kind of, give into that time.
But you know what I mean? It's kind of like I do struggle sometimes. You ask me about physical media, and I'm like, yeah, I don't do it. But at the same time, it's not that I'm not tempted. I am tempted to start over from scratch with everything all over again with 4Ks, but I'm not going to.
It's funny you say that, Jim, because I think there's an interesting Venn diagram with those of us that have collected physical media, in whatever form, and nostalgia.
Yeah.
If you kind of take out the audio and cinephiles that absolutely need the 4K version, it seems like a lot of the boutique labels have kind of really made their hay by going after those deep cuts, those movies that never got a quote unquote like proper release.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, putting something in a maybe prettier bow with a steel book, or putting special features that for the most part, like it's a movie that you may have seen a dozen or so times on cable through its various iterations from VHS to DVD to Blu-ray. But all of a sudden now you have a feature length DVD exclusive interview with all the folks behind the making of John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. Well, if that's not on the other versions I have, now I'm buying the Shout Factory In the Mouth of Madness release because I have to have it. But it feels like that's almost in tandem with nostalgia, where you might have already owned a copy of it. And again, you're talking about your walls. You did own a copy of it, but now they're showing you this other thing, that they're dangling this in front of you, Jim, that's just tempting you to buy it.
I'll be honest. I bought into the whole commentary thing back in the late 90s when it was a new, fresh, young thing. The idea that all these people were going to be talking and giving you the behind the scenes scoops. And what's funny is that it was enjoyable for up to a certain point, but as I've gotten older, I found it less and less interesting, to be honest, to hear the DVD commentary tracks, to the point where like I said, now I buy everything on streaming where I don't even have that as an option anymore. And I don't miss it. I really don't. I mean, there are some nice tidbits to have with DVD commentaries. And if that's your thing, power to you. It's just not mine anymore. It was for the longest time. That used to be a big sale, but just because something's coming out nowadays in a fancy new box with a new commentary is not going to get me to buy it.
Well, we should probably, at some point, kick this episode off in earnest. So you are listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and I am one of your hosts, Peter Charbonneau, joined always by my good friend, Bernie Gonzalez, and we've been chatting with Jim Carl. If you've ever paid a visit to the nearly 100-year-old Carolina Theater here in Durham, North Carolina, chances are you've probably seen our guest, Jim. He's often in the lobby greeting moviegoers as they head into perhaps the Retro Film Fest, Splatterfix, or any other number of amazing curated films that the Carolina shows. And so, Bernie, you and I talked not too long ago about our love for indie cinemas, and we kind of did a little around the country stop with some of our favorites that we've either been to or have heard about. And I think it's safe to say that the Carolina is right up there with all of the ones, certainly that I've been to, and I've lived around the country quite a few places. So it's especially exciting to have Jim on to talk a little bit about what he does at the Carolina and just also his love of film. So Jim, formally welcome.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Bernie. It's really nice to be here, chat with you guys. Yeah, I love movies, so let's get this puppy off. What do you want to know?
You can dispel or verify the consensus that in your role as senior director of film at the Carolina Theater, that you do or do not have the greatest job in the country.
I do have the greatest.
Okay.
It's America's greatest job. This has been proven by scientists. I have the greatest job in the country.
Science backed.
Yes, it is science backed by NASA. Yes, this is very true. I have a really cushy, fun job. I love what I do. And I am very fortunate, and I understand that I'm very fortunate. And the one thing about my job that a lot of people don't really understand is it didn't start this way. It's not like this was the job when I started working at the Carolina all those years ago. It was in a slow evolving process to where we are today. People think that all I do is just pick movies that are going to play at the Carolina Theater, but there's a whole lot. If you ever worked in a performing arts center, there's a whole lot more that goes into it. But yeah, you're right. I love my job.
And I think we'll get into more about your job, but I think we want to rewind it a little bit first to just kind of get like how you made it to Durham and the Carolina Theater, but also like where that love of movies was first instilled. So you grew up, I believe, in Sweetwater, Texas. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was home of the world's largest rattlesnake roundup and nothing else.
All right. Hey, guys, welcome back. Okay, so it's not my mic. You are hearing rattlesnakes rattling right now. I hope you can hear that. Wow. The Rattlesnake Roundup is coming up here in just a couple of weeks. It's always the second weekend in March.
So, yeah, I mean, I grew up in West Texas, but I had a military family that I grew up with that I would travel around and live in different parts of the country. And I had a mother that lived out in Los Angeles for a while, a dad, and whose family lived up in New York. So I was, even though I primarily was based growing up in West Texas, I was exposed to living in Los Angeles. I was in New York and in Pennsylvania and in Nebraska and in San Antonio. So I did travel quite a bit as a kid. I was the first person in my family to ever fly on an airplane. When I was 13 years old, decided to fly out to visit my mother for the first time on a plane. And just got on the plane and took off and had a great time. I had to learn how to do all those kind of things. So yeah, I mean, I grew up in West Texas, but I did live a lot of different places during that time as well, even though, Sweetwater was home base.
Was there a seminal moment? Was there a specific film that kind of started that journey for you, for your love of film now?
Not really. I mean, I do remember going to the movies was a big part of what my family did. And so I remember getting dragged to see Carrie when I was like 7 years old. I mean, there was no guidance here. I mean, I had family members that were just happy to take me. And so I was everything from Escape to Witch Mountain to The Exorcist to Carrie, Maniac, Friday the 13th, Cat from Outer Space, anything in the late 70s, early 80s. If it came through a West Texas theater, I got dragged to it. I enjoyed going to the movies. And then when my mom was living out in Los Angeles, again, you're talking Universal Studios in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And so I used to fly out to Los Angeles, and my mother used to buy me just a summer pass to go to the Universal Studios tour. And I used to go several times a week, and just get on the tour and go look at all the exhibits and stuff like that. I mean, my mom was working, but I was 13, 14 years old. Again, this is Generation X. So we're talking about, Generation X type of parenting. There was no concern. I mean, I was 13, 14 years old, and my mother would just buy me a summer pass to Universal, a summer bus pass so I could take the bus. And in the morning, I'd get up, say, "Bye, Mom." And I'd jump on the bus and drive out to, take the bus out to Universal Studios, spend the whole day running around. I remember being out in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater, waiting for the bus at 2 a.m, just standing there, 14 years old, all by myself. And I remember this vividly because I remember turning around and looking, and there was this huge banner for Annie, which had just opened that weekend at the Grauman's Chinese Theater. So anyway, so between getting to spend all this time, between family members taking me to the movies, being around the movies, and getting to Universal Studios as many times as I wanted and stuff like that, I did. I loved movies. I loved the movies of that time period. They're still my favorites. Nostalgia is strong. Nostalgia is really strong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that carried through pretty much through college, and later on in life, I ended up working on some film productions when I lived in New York City, and then I eventually funneled all of that into where we are today with the Carolina Theater, and working for them and producing film festivals and film series, and basically just having a good old time with it.
I think my parents were similar to yours, and I've told this story many times on the show as well, but my parents took me to see Jaws at the drive-in when I was, I think, 3 years old.
I miss drive-ins.
I do too. Not too long ago, when I was out in Fort Collins, Colorado, there's still an active one out there, and we got to go see it. And so you've got the mountains in the background, rising up above the screen as the sun's setting. It was amazing. But yeah, I very much missed them as well.
I remember having a similar love for movies, seemingly, I think, one that we all kind of share. But was there a moment for you when it kind of turned from movies kind of being like music, it's just in the background of your life? You're comfortable going to movie theaters, about, new releases, and you're seeking out movies, where you start looking to this other point where, I think of Monster Kids and how, they always talk about, the second you buy Famous Monsters of Filmland or Fangoria, and you realize that there are these people like Tom Savini, Rick Baker, that are making these things that you love so much. Was there a time that you can remember, something when you start picking up Entertainment Weekly, you start looking at the behind the scenes, the production of film, then not necessarily beyond being just an audience member, that you were more than comfortable being?
I mean, honestly, there's not a time in my life that I can remember where film and movies weren't a part of it. I mean, looking back on it, some of these significant moments in your life, that things like this, these aha moments that you're talking about, when they happen, you don't really realize it until, you look back on it 20 or 30 years later. And if I had to choose that time period when I probably did, when something like that did happen to me, I would probably say it was in the early 80s. Maybe 1980, 81, but I can't point to a specific film. I remember going to see Empire Strikes Back. I remembered going to see Flash Gordon.
Join us for the fantastic adventures of Flash Gordon. Flash uses football to fight his enemy, Ming the Merciless.
Titus, are your men on the right vitamins?
Flash's strategy proved successful. Will he survive? Find out December 5th at a theater near you. Music by Queen. Rated PG.
I remember going to see a lot of these movies by myself. I didn't have any brothers or sisters, so going to the movies, I usually went with friends, or I went, like I said, occasionally a family member, but for the most time, it was by myself, going to see a lot of these movies. And because I was one of those kids that always looked a little older than he actually was, I never got carded. Never once in my life did I get carded. So I was going to see all kinds of stuff that I probably shouldn't have, but I remember going to see Neighbors, and I remember with John Belushi and things like that. Honestly, I think where my love for film started had to do with the hobby that I created when I was a little kid. And what I used to do is, after I'd go see a movie, and I started doing this in the mid-'70s, after I'd go see a movie, I would track down the newspaper and I would cut out the ad slick from the newspaper of that ad for that film. And I used to have a box of all these clippings of all of my, of all the films that I had seen. And then the box got big enough that I actually started putting these clippings in photo albums so that I could remember I went and saw this and I saw this. And it became like this hobby where I started collecting photo albums filled with clippings of the ad slicks from the movies. Ad slicks were just the movie posters, the way they used to show them in the newspapers. And I had, oh my God, I filled up probably 50 or 60 of these photo albums with these clippings. You know, some kids, I mean, of course, I had lots of other toys and stuff like that to play with growing up as well. But, you know, so I used to take a look through these photo albums. You know, what's funny is that subconsciously I was memorizing the posters because what that instilled in me really young was I started memorizing taglines of movie posters without even realizing I was doing it just because I was looking at the slicks all the time. I started recognizing the marketing of film. So those ad slicks paved way to movie posters, which I started collecting when I was 12. And I now that I never got rid of. I probably have about 4,000 original movie posters in my collection at this point from that time period. But that kind of paved way then to the collecting the VHS. And even to this day, if I see a re-release of an old classic movie and it does not have the correct artwork on that cover, it's screw that. I'm not going to buy it. I mean, I want the original artwork because I recognize it. It's part of what I remember. So going back to your question, yeah, it was probably more that of collecting those ad slicks more so than any one film. It was just a slow evolution where these ad slicks, like I said, became, you know, movie posters, turned into VHS tapes, and eventually a career in the film business, and then up to where I am now. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you, I had something a prop I was going to grab. I have them here in thankfully I have a huge closet. I have about, I'd say 100 of these photo albums. An original Halloween, Nightwing, Johnny, All Night Long. Over here, what do we have here?
The Land That Time Forgot?
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, this is my original one. This is the very first book I ever started. I still have it. But like I said, I kept doing this all the way through high school and college. I used to go to the library, no matter in what city I was in, and they would give me old back issues of the newspapers, and I would take out the entertainment sections just to collect ad slicks for movies that weren't playing anywhere near me, but were playing like in New York or in Dallas or in Los Angeles. Eventually, what ended up happening is that I stopped collecting the little ones, and I used to collect them, you know, the bigger ones. Yeah, I mean, every now and then I will have somebody, you know, who really loves movies that'll say, I want to look through those. I mean, I want to do that. And of course, back in the days prior to the internet, there were people who knew that I had this collection that knew when a DVD release was coming out. I would get contacted by the distributor and ask, do I have an ad slick for this? Because they wanted to scan it and put it as part of on the DVD as part of the marketing materials. Of course, nowadays they don't ask anymore because you could find a lot of that stuff online. Other people have scanned their stuff in. You know, it's another one of those things we were talking earlier about dragging VHS tapes each time you move and how much of a pain it is. It's the same thing with these books. Because like I said, they're heavy. They're heavy. But unlike VHS, where I figure I can just, you know, somebody else will take them, I can't toss this stuff. And so it stays with me. Who knows what I'm going to do with it?
Because Bernie and I have talked about, it's been more with like going to the mom and pop video store before Blockbuster kind of took over everything and kind of getting sold on those VHS cover art. Like, you know, a lot of times like the movie didn't quite live up to that box hype, but like that would sell you. Like when you saw some of this stuff, were you collecting it more as these were movies that you had seen, or that, like you're saying, like were playing elsewhere, or was any of that, like, were you drawn in to be like, oh, that's like a really interesting poster design, I got to see this?
No, I was collecting everything. It started originally as a child only taken the clippings of the films I had seen, and that's how it started. But then it became an addiction where I wanted everything, regardless if I had seen it or not. And so I remember going back to my hometown newspaper, and they let me go through back issues all the way to the mid-'70s. And I was clipping everything then because I was trying to fill up as many books as possible. And like I said, I was going and grabbing the New York Times and the Dallas Morning News and the Los Angeles Times and clipping all of the artwork out of them, even of movies that I had never seen. Because to me, I'm such a completionist that I felt like I needed to be able to have everything that was released that year. And the other thing that's interesting about these books is that they're in release order, meaning that when I flip through one of these books, I know, for example, based on the pages and where they are, that Psycho 2 opened right around the same time as The Man with Two Brains and Octopussy, because that's the order as I was pasting them in the book. That's also interesting, especially now. Of course, again, you can always look up the stuff up online on Box Office Mojo and stuff like that now. But 15, 20 years ago, when I was doing all the research for a lot of the programs that happened at the Retro Film Series, I would go through these books sometimes to get ideas. We're talking back before the internet existed, before you could do those types of searches. It was a lot of trying to program that series in the early 2000s and probably up until around 2010, if not even a little bit after that. It was hard because you were relying on memory. You were relying on, the Roger Ebert movie guide or things like that. You were really relying on the little surveys that I asked the members to fill out as they walk in the door about what's their favorite movie that they want us to show at the theater for a future retro. I was really relying on all of that because there was no internet search database back in that period. I mean, I remember when IMDb finally debuted, and I thought that was the greatest thing I had ever seen, because finally I didn't have to rely on these, paperback 300-page paperback books printed by Leonard Maltin and Roger Ebert to try to remind me of...
Hey there, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Thanks for being with us on TCM. For the next few hours, I'll be joined by a good friend of ours, a member of the TCM family, film historian and critic Leonard Maltin. Leonard, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Ben. Thanks.
Always good to see you. Leonard is here to discuss the release of his latest film catalog, which includes more than 10,000 titles. It's Turner Classic Movies presents Leonard Maltin's Classic Movie Guide from the silent era through 1965.
So that's been a great saving grace, and these books were the equivalent of my own personal Roger Ebert and Leonard Maltin guide. They helped me take a look and like I said, back when I was looking for ideas, I would flip through the books. And of course, nowadays I go to ChatGPT and just say, give me a list of the top 30 films from this particular month and this particular year, and it'll just pop it right out for me.
Well, I was going to ask, how the Retro Film Series has kind of evolved over 25 plus years that you've been doing. And I guess you kind of just answered it in that way. But I think this is a good segue to kind of get into your arrival at the Carolina Theater and what you do. I mean, I'm kind of fascinated by what you do, because just speaking personally, as someone that's gone to countless films and has been to countless theaters, I don't think I ever thought too hard about what goes into the programming of some of these things. Like I would be when I lived in Boston, the Coolidge Corner Theater was amazing. And one summer they had a Get Crazy with Swayze, and every week was a different Patrick Swayze movie. And it's like, oh, this is amazing. It's like, these people are tapped into my brain. I think that's about as far as it went. But I realized that there's a lot more that goes into that. And I think you just shed a little bit of light into what goes into that. But, to do what you've been doing for, I don't want to age you, but it's been a long time programming for the Carolina Theater.
There are no written records or survivors. That is true.
Okay, good.
I'll give you an example. As we speak tonight on this podcast, I'm currently in the middle of programming January through June of 2026 for the Retro Film Series. I have to have the entire 6-month lineup completed by the end of September, if not earlier, so that the brochures can get printed, website can be created, web pages, box office, all of that stuff is going to happen for the brochure to arrive in early or mid-November so that audiences have it for at least 6 weeks before that January 1st show happens. I need to have everything ready by the end of September. So I'm booking films currently that are not going to be seen on a screen by audiences for 9 months, until June of 2026. So, I mean, every season it's, you start you start with the blank sheet of paper. Thankfully I have an entire box of those little retro slips that each person fills out that says, this is the movie I want to see, that I would love for you to bring back. And I do actually read every single one of those. I collect them. I put them in a box in my office. And every 6 months I dump out the box and I spend hours looking through every single slip and making little piles of things that I hadn't considered, things that I can just discard because you recently played them. And anyway, I usually end up with at least 60 or 70 little slips of ideas. And that's where you start. I mean, literally, it's like writing a new novel every 6 months. You start from scratch. You got to get ideas. I have a database that I've been collecting for the last 28 years of every single retro show that's ever played. And I can easily, if I'm thinking to myself, it's like adventures in babysitting. All I can do is open up my database. It's in alphabetical order. I can scroll down to the letter A, look for adventures in babysitting. And in that spreadsheet, it'll show me every single time that I have played Adventures in Babysitting since I started working at the Carolina Theater back in the 90s. And that also gives me a frame of reference of how recently did I last run it.
Mm-hmm.
And how did it do, and what series did I play it in? So it's always you always start with just trying to get ideas. You start gathering ideas of what haven't you played for a while? What does the audience want to see? What's having an anniversary? What's popular? I try to get a good mix of things that I know are going to have big commercial, appeal to bring back. I mean, you have your 30 or 40 films that you could program every single season and will always do well. So like things like The Shining and Big Trouble in Little China and The Goonies, the Dark Crystal Muppet movie.
Now available from Jim Henson Video. Hollywood, the pot of gold at the rainbow's end.
Hey, we're all going to Hollywood. You want to come with us?
Hollywood! It's time to grab your pack, stick out your thumb, and hitch a ride for the adventure of your life.
Hey, wait for me!
It's Jim Henson's The Muppet Movie.
Moving right along. Footloose and fancy free.
You know, I hear this movie is dynamite.
But you can't always show the same thing. Yeah, you can't always show the same thing. But I do sprinkle those in, 2 or 3 a season, because those are the big things that those are the sure things. So, basically I have been working on this January through June 2026 lineup now for 3 weeks, and it's full days. It is not just a couple of hours a day, because you're tracking down. You have to first start off with, thematically, what are you going to program as a double feature? How many series are you going to program? And you have to do all the research for the rights. Who owns the rights to this? Are they going to have, you're emailing the studios, asking them, are they planning to put this film on moratorium?
When they decided to go home,
judging by the pollution content of the atmosphere, I believe we have arrived at the latter half of the 20th century.
Everybody remember where we parked.
They had no idea how far they'd go.
Many of their customs will doubtless take us by surprise.
What does it mean, exact change?
You're from outer space.
No, I'm from Iowa. I only work in outer space.
Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, rated PG.
Now playing at theaters everywhere.
A perfect example. I was already planning to show Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, in Fantastic Realm next February, because it's the 40th anniversary of that film. I'd already laid it on the schedule. Pretty much, I thought that series was done. Had already sent my offers in to all the studios about booking it. Just this morning, Paramount sends out, and they do this to some distributors or some exhibitors, not all of them, but if you're on the list, and I am, they'll send you like a confidential document of all the films that they're planning to either re-release, put as a Fathom event, or put on moratorium for one reason or the other in the next year. And as it happens, Star Trek VI was on that list. Again, this is early this morning, and here I am. Now I have to find a replacement film for this title that I thought was a sure thing that would be a good, easy crowd pleaser. So yeah, it's not just you have to write the synopses, you have to contact the studios, especially when you're dealing with epics. Does the digital cinema print that they're going to send you have a built-in intermission? Does it not have a built-in intermission? If there's multiple cuts, which version are they going to allow you to screen? Because you aren't always allowed to screen every cut that just happens to be available out there. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And plus laying out the schedules of what's going to play against what in what room at what time and just trying to build it all out. But I'm almost there. I'm almost finished. I'm hoping that I've got it almost done. I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I've placed all my offers to all the studios. And that's the other thing. When people talk about how do you book a movie? Well, first of all, you have to have a contact at that studio that wants to work with you. And basically, it's just like you would book a show or book a concert or book anything else, book a reservation at a restaurant. You reach out to your booker at each respective studio. There's a separate one for each studio. You email them, you send them your list of what you are thinking about showing. You give them your potential dates, which means that you have to know the date that you want to screen it already in place before you can ask them about the title. Wow. Which is what makes it a little hard sometimes. Because if you just throw them an email saying, hey, I'm thinking about showing History of the World Part 1 next season, can I book it? The first question they're going to ask you is, well, what's the date? So again, you really can't even start approaching the studios until you've locked out your schedule. And that's when you start emailing the studios, and then they start responding, and you find out that this is not available. This is going to be a moratorium. And, you might have programmed a certain double feature a certain way, but if it was a thematic tissue that connected that double feature in one of the films is not available anymore, sometimes that just throws out the entire double feature. I literally had that come up on a double feature, which I'm not going to name, but it was 2 90s comic book films that I wanted to show that people have been asking for. And I really thought this would be an easy booking. And as it turns out, one of the films is not going to be available from Paramount. These are the kind of things that that why it takes so long to program these things. Then you also have to write the synopses, collect the trailers, collect the images and all the artwork, make sure that it's all studio approved. It's a lengthy process. It takes me usually 3 to 4 weeks to lay out an entire 6-month series with all of the different sub-series and everything else. So kudos to all the other programmers out there in the country that it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. It's a lot more research. And you have to be very good at math. It's the other thing. And people always say, when people tell me that I'd love to have your job, the first thing I tell them is, are you good at math? They're like, what? What are you talking about? I'm like, because you do. You better be good at math, because you better look, you need to be able to look at a film schedule with 3 different columns, or if you're working for a 12-plex, good God, that's 12 columns. But basically, you have to look at a film and say, okay, it starts at 2:50. It's 117 minutes plus 18 minutes worth of commercial. 117 and 18 is, what is that? 145. So that's 2 hours and 25 minutes. It starts at 2:50, 3:50, 4:50. So it ends at 5:35. You're going to do this over and over and over and over again. And if you make one mistake on the schedule, suddenly you cause a domino effect that will just basically crash everything for the rest of that day.
And I imagine, like, if you're working within the framework of a festival too, because the Carolina has 3 theaters that it has available to. I mean, you also do first run films. There's comedy events, podcasting events, concerts. There's a lot going on at the theater. But if you're in the framework of a festival, you're obviously, I'm guessing, trying to time things up so that if people want to get out of one movie and then hit the next one in another theater, you got to make sure that there's no overlap there.
Oh, yeah. That's another big part of it, is laying your schedule out so that if you have 3 venues or 3 screening rooms, you want to make sure that all 3 screens end right around the same time and that the next round of 3 films all start around the same time. So you do stagger them like a 5, 5:10, and a 5:20, a 7, 7:10, and a 7:20. But yeah, the idea being that if you were watching a film in this cinema that lets out at 3, that you are going to have time to pick from the 3 next films that are playing at 3:20, 3:30, and 3:40. So yeah, there's a lot of that involved as well. Trying to, again, this is the boring part that people don't realize happens in programming. This is not the fun stuff that people think. When they think of film programming, they think of, getting to, talk to the studios and pick the films and watch movies. This is the boring part. And so I'm not sure if your listeners are all that interested in this part of it, but yeah, there's a lot that goes into it.
That contributes to the user experience. And they may not be front of mind for people, but if you're not on top of your game, that affects their experience, and maybe they won't come back for the next series or the next feature.
超ドラゴン怪獣キングギドラ出現。迎え撃つゴジラ。二大怪獣最後の激突。ゴジラ対キングギドラ。12月決戦。
ただいま劇場で前売り券をお買い上げの方に超ミニ版ゴジラ怪獣大図鑑プレゼント。テレカ付き限定前売り券もよろしく。
I was in attendance for one of the kaiju quest. It was Godzilla versus King Ghidorah recently. You mentioned a story of how you kind of almost like stumbled upon learning that movie was available to screen. And I don't know if that happens very often, but I was kind of fascinated, how that came about, that you were able to present it at the theater.
Yeah, so a lot of times when you're dealing with the studios, you would think, and most people would agree, that the rep at the studio knows their own catalog of what they have rights to, like the back of their hand. And this is not true. A lot of the times, I've asked the studio rep, do you have a particular title? And they've never even heard of it. And they have to actually go research it and call the legal department to see if they even have the rights. You would think in 2025 that each of these reps would have a database on their laptop with easily accessible. They can just look it up and click a few buttons and yes, we do, or no, we don't. And yet, you'd be amazed at how many of them don't have that. Sure, they have the list of probably the 300 or 400 titles that they most commonly get requested. But when you start asking for deep cuts, films that don't get requested very often, those probably aren't on their databases. They haven't even thought about them. So when you hit them up and you're looking for, Yellow Hair and the Fortress of Gold,
more destructive than a regiment of soldiers. More deadly than a flying snake. More savage than an army of cutthroats. And more woman than any man could hold. She's Yellowhair. The adventuress who goes where ordinary men fall short. Where mercenaries drop out. And where soldiers of fortune lose their heads. Yellowhair and the Fortress of Gold.
Which the studio will look at and say, what in the hell is that? They have to go look it up. Nobody's asked them for this film in years. All of a sudden you come along and now you're making them work.
Same director of Hundra, and he went on to create Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. He also directed the Tiger Man movie in 3D, Pete.
You nerd.
That's right. Proud of it. Laminated card. We get ours from the same place, kid.
I have my Blu-ray copy over there.
There you go.
No, so with King Ghidorah, here's an example of a film. Toho owns all the Godzilla films, with the exception of King Kong versus Godzilla, which they co-produced with Universal. But apart from that one film, Toho owns all of these films, and there are rights scattered. Most of them belong to Janus Films, which is the Criterion Collection, who currently maintains most of these Godzilla films in the United States. At least the U.S. the U.S. theatrical screening rights. But Sony does have a few of them, mostly from the Millennium era. Janus Films has most of the Hensai and the Showa era. Sony has most of the Millennium era. Well, anyway, the story goes, I had contacted the rep at Sony several times as we programmed this Kaiju Quest, which is a film series dedicated to giant monster movies. They don't always necessarily have to be Godzilla. They can be the host, or, Jaws would qualify, Tremors, things like that. But mostly it has been Godzilla films. And I had asked them about their list of what Godzilla films they owned. And they provided me the list of 4 or 5 that they had, and I showed them over the last couple of seasons, and I had run out. There are a couple of the Godzilla films from the Millennium era that I had never shown. And I happened to notice on a rabbit hole that I was going down on the internet for something completely different. I found an article from a couple of years ago where they were discussing Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, Godzilla versus Mothra, Battle for Earth, things like that. And that Sony had the rights to these titles. Sony Pictures had the rights to these titles a few years ago, and they released them on Blu-ray. Now, remember, Blu-ray rights are not the same as U.S. theatrical screening rights. People get this confused all of the time. People will say to me, well, why can't you show it? It's available on Blu-ray. It's available on streaming. I can watch it on Apple TV. Why can't you show it? And that's because these are all different types of rights. There's Blu-ray rights, and there's home video rights, and there's streaming rights, and then there's what's called theatrical rights. And sometimes when a studio negotiates with a distributor like Toho to acquire a film, they're really only wanting the streaming and Blu-ray rights. They don't really want to deal with the theatrical rights. Going back to Sony, so I reached out to the rep at Sony, and I asked them, I said, you used to have the rights to these 2 films. Can you actually check and see if they still exist? And he's like, Jim, they're not in my database. They're not showing up anywhere. But he did. He went and looked. He asked legal, and he came back at me and goes, you know what? You're right. We do own these rights. They're not expired yet. Usually when you're dealing with a foreign distributor like Toho, they only give you the rights for a certain amount of time, a couple of years, and then the rights expire unless you renew them, just like a copyright. But no, Sony had the theatrical rights to Godzilla versus King Ghidorah and Godzilla versus Mothra, but even though they hadn't lapsed, they had forgotten to include them and update all of their own databases. So inadvertently, we ended up being one of the very, if not the first theater in many, many years to show Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. And stuff like that happens all the time, where I'll contact a studio and or I'm trying to find something, and then I'll ask them a question and they have to go look it up. And even the rep is amazed that they even own the rights to this. I did this just last year with Paramount when I was trying to find out did they own the Boogans from 1981. And as it turns out, yes, they did.
You were alone. The house seems deathly still. And then it could be nothing, just your imagination. Or this time, it could be the Boogans. An adventure in terror. The Boogans. Rated R. From Taft International Pictures.
Starts Friday at a theater near you. Check newspapers for theaters in time.
And that rep at Paramount was like, what the hell is the Boogans? And I had to explain it to him. The Boogans is amazing. It's amazing.
I wonder if you're playing this game on hard mode on purpose. Because like you mentioned, you're juggling everything from theater logistics, time, releases. You're dealing audience perception. Is it a movie that you think an audience may be attracted to? You're dealing with changing demographics in folks that go to the theater.
Running in a tertiary market on top of that, where the audience changes every 3 or 4 years because so many people move in and out of the triangle as well.
The fact that you're talking about juggling anniversaries, but then on top of all that, the idea that your criteria includes that the movie has to be 20 plus years old.
On average, yeah. 20 plus years is pretty much the cutoff. I do wiggle around with that every now and then. I am willing to fluctuate that if it's a film that I think that has enough of a draw to not necessarily have to be 20 years old. A perfect example is Big Lebowski. I was running that as part of Retro long before it was 20 years old. I mean, there are a couple of titles, Starship Troopers and Galaxy Quest, or a couple of others where they became almost out of the gate big cult classics that you knew they were going to be cult classics. They didn't have to take time. But my theory with programming retro is that basically it takes about 20 years for a film to become nostalgic, for an audience member to want to pay to see it in a theater. Pay is the key word here. Yes, they'll watch it on streaming over and over and over again, but you have to be able to, you have to show people something that they actually want to get up out of the house, which is harder and harder to do these days, to get in their car, drive to downtown Durham and actually pay to see something back on the big screen. If you've got something that's only a couple of years old, with very few exceptions, they're really not going to do that unless you offer it for free, which is what I've discovered. Free screenings don't count. Everybody will show up when it's free. But if you're going to pay to come back and see something, you better have something that they want to see. And it takes about 20 years for that generation to grow up and to start feeling nostalgic about things that they saw when they were younger. It also takes about that long for that person to grow up and have kids that they now want to bring and take them to see that experience that they had growing up. So 90s nostalgia is real popular right now. Thank God we're getting out of the 80s. And I am a Gen Xer. I love the 80s, but my God, can we not have to show the same damn films for 5,000 times? I have to show Never-Ending Story, The Goonies, Big Trouble, all those films that everybody loves.
Remember the name Jack Burton.
Who? Jack Burton. Me.
Where's Jack?
Jack! Everybody relax, I'm here.
How are you going to spring us?
I have no idea.
He's coming to rescue your summer.
Hey, what more can a guy ask for?
Big Trouble in Little China. Rated PG-13. Starts Wednesday, July 2nd at a theater near you.
You can only run those so many times before you start getting diminishing returns. So now 90s nostalgia has really kicked in, and the 80s nostalgia, it's still there. I mean, as long as there's a Gen Xer alive left in the world, there's going to be 80s nostalgia. I can honestly tell you that. But 90s nostalgia is now it's overcoming 80s nostalgia, at least when it comes to films. I'm seeing more and more requests on the surveys for films from the 90s than I used to see from films from the 80s. So even as we approach next season, I'm programming probably the largest amount of 90s films in retros than I ever have in any previous season, and again, you have to adjust to the audience as certain audience members, as certain generations start to age out, and I am that Gen Xer. It's even hard for me to sit through a double feature on a Friday night at this point, even if it's two films that I really like, especially that second film. But, the millennials, that's not a problem for them so much right now. So, yeah. And so that's the other thing you got to take into consideration is as you progress through all of this, as the years go by, you do have to change your programming and keep it current with who is currently coming to the theater. And that, again, is a big thing. You have to always take into consideration disregard to people online. You can post something and get 10,000 likes. Doesn't make a damn difference. Likes are not paying customers. We're talking about the people that actually show up on night of show and buy a ticket or in the room. That's your audience, and that's the audience you really have to pay attention to as far as the demographic of what do they want to see, what people online want to see, who cares? Honestly, I mean, it's nice, I suppose, to get likes, but it's a lot better to actually have people show up at the theater and actually pay to see something. And those are the people that I really pay attention to, and what I'm noticing, it's a lot of millennials, and thank God for them.
All right, that's the end of part one of our conversation with Jim Carl, again, Senior Director of Film at the Carolina Theater of Durham. You want to check out part two of our conversation. We talk about that first retro screening back in November of 98, where the theater showed Friday the 13th, part two, how things have changed, how things have evolved, how Jim has been able to maintain that retro-worthy. What makes these movies retro-worthy, especially as things are changing over time, from audiences to technology. We talk about Splatterfest, a week of gory, scary horror movies that Jim programs in October, and what's coming up this October of 2025. So much more. So check out part two, and thanks for listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast.